I've been walking with my face turned to the sun. Weight on my shoulders, a bullet in my gun. Oh, I got eyes in the back of my head, just in case I have to run. I do what I can when I can, while I can for my people. While the clouds roll back and the stars fill the night, that's when I'm gonna stand up, take my people with me. Together we are going to a brand new home, far across the river. Can you hear freedom calling, calling me to answer? Gonna keep on keeping on. I can feel it in my bones. Early in the morning, before the sun begins to shine, we're gonna start moving towards that separating line. I'm wading through muddy waters. You know I got a made up mind, and I don't mind if I lose any blood on the way to salvation. And I'll fight with the strength that I got until I die. So I'm gonna stand up, take my people with me. Together we are going to a brand new home, far across the river. Can you hear freedom calling, calling me to answer? Gonna keep on keeping on. And I know what's around the bend might be hard to face 'cause I'm alone, and I just might fail, but Lord knows I'll try. Shysters fill up the sky. Stand up, take my people with me. Together we are going to a brand new home, far across the river. Can you hear freedom calling, calling me to answer? Gonna keep on keeping on. I'm gonna stand up, take my people with me. Together we are going to a brand new home, far across the river. Do you hear freedom calling, calling me to answer? Gonna keep on keeping on. I'm gonna stand up, take my people with me. Together we are going to a brand new home, far across the river. I hear freedom calling, calling me to answer. Gonna keep on keeping on. I can feel it in my bones. I go to prepare a place for you. I go to prepare a place for you. I go to prepare a place for you. I go to
Good afternoon and welcome to Evergreen State College-Tacoma. This is our Black History Month series, and we are in our second week We want to welcome you at noon for your lunch and your learn. We got lots of learning to do today. I want to acknowledge Meryl Pusey and Coley Gladney for their beautiful artwork that they have just graced us with. Oh my goodness, how beautiful. We could not have a better opening. And those are our own artists, our own creators right here among us at Evergreen State College. Thank you so much to our dear colleagues, Meryl Pusey and to Coley Gladney for your art contribution today. And to Cynthia Envio for that beautiful song, Stand Up. If you haven't seen Harriet, that song is about Harriet Tubman. I just think it's about me, and it's probably about you. It's such a beautiful, spiritual, uplifting, and so appropriate for today as we bring our hearts and our minds together. And we ask all of you to just focus in for the next hour as we get to hear from some of the most brilliant minds of our time. We are so honored today that we are visited by Dr. Daniels. We are visited today by Dr. Ron Daniels, who is a veteran, social and political activist. Dr. Ron Daniels was an independent candidate for president of the United States in 1992. He served as executive director of the National Rainbow Coalition in 1987 and Southern Regional Coordinator and Deputy Campaign Manager for the Jesse Jackson for President campaign in 1988. He holds a BA degree in history from Youngstown State University, an MA in political science from Rockefeller School of Public Affairs in Albany, New York, and a doctorate of philosophy in Africana Studies from the Union Institute and University of Cincinnati. From 1993 to 2000, Dr. Daniels served as first African-American Executive Director of the Center for Constitutional Rights, CCR, where he emerged as a major force fighting threats to civil liberties against police brutality and misconduct, church burnings, hate crimes, voter disenfranchisement, environmental racism. Need I go on? Let me introduce you now to Dr. Ron Daniels.
Well, good morning, good morning, good morning. It's morning. Well, it's afternoon. I'm sorry, I get confused between East Coast and West Coast. So good day to everyone. Let me just also say that in my current capacity, I'm a retired distinguished lecturer at Emeritus at York College, City University of New York, where I taught political science and was privileged to work with students on an internship program. I'm also the president of the Institute of the Black World 21st Century and the convener of the National African American Reparations Commission. So I first want to acknowledge Dr. Marcia Arunga for her gracious invitation to join you today in this Black History Month space at Evergreen College. I also just want to, he may not be on the line, but give a shout out to an Institute of the Black World 21st Century board member, Kevin Baker, who is of great assistance to us in many ways. And I don't know, but that an alum from a Seattle region, Tiana Stowers Pearson, my executive assistant, may be on the line as well. I want to give her a shout out. And also, just in case there's some people who are out there, we work with Dr. Arunga. She was very helpful as we were engaged in a conversation with scores of people about the possibilities of actually initiating a reparations project in Seattle, Washington, at the behest of the mayor, the current mayor, who ultimately decided that she is moving on. I just want to acknowledge that it was great talking to so many people. And who knows, because of this conversation, some of you may pick this up and we'll move forward with that initiative. So I just wanted to quickly say that. Also, and among those, I need to give a shout out to, we talk about my independent campaign for president, my role with the Rainbow Coalition. Larry Gossett is sort of an iconic figure out that way, dear friend, beloved, and he also was very instrumental and very helpful. I want to do this as a basic primer. We'll call it, well, the topic I'm speaking to is reparations, an idea whose time has come. Reparations, an idea whose time has come. And the way I want to approach this over the next few minutes, because I'm going to do some rapid speak, because I want to leave plenty of time for questions and answers. And so I've tried to master this rapid speak technique. So you're going to have to hang on my every word. It's through a Reparations 101 followed by Q&A. I want to guide you to the IBW website as a resource, ibw21.org. That's ibw21.org. We have the most extensive online reparations resource center of anywhere in the world. You can spend hours and hours there getting all videos, studies, speeches, incredible information. So that is a resource that I would encourage you to follow up on. I want to begin with the definition. People will say, what is reparations? Well, reparations, the word belies its meaning. Reparations largely means repair. That's the essence of reparations. Repair for what? Reparations is for the repair of the oppression, the exploitation, the physical, spiritual, cultural, and mental destruction of a people. That is the essence of it. And it may also include identity, the wiping away of identity. And so when we talk about reparations, and one of our hosts was talking about getting into psychology, it is about healing ultimately. How do you heal and repair the damages inflicted upon the people by this kind of oppression? And in that regard, this is not something new. It's a word that may be unfamiliar to some, but it's not unprecedented to have reparations awarded to people. One of the most popular examples that people may know about is in Nazi Germany, unfortunately, one of the most horrific Holocausts in the history of the world, the mechanized destruction of 6 million Jews and another 6 million people who were considered deviants, non-Aryans, 12 million people who were destroyed under Hitler's Nazi Germany. Well, based on the Nuremberg trials and international law, Germany had to pay reparations in the form of various forms to Jews for the Holocaust of enslavement. If we go to Canada, for example, the Canadian government, though that repair is yet to be fulfilled, the indigenous nations, the Aleuts and the Eskimos and so forth, have been granted reparations for the encroachment, the dispossession that took place there in Canada. And out your very way in the Seattle region, the internment of Japanese Americans, one of the really dark chapters in American history, where Japanese American citizens were interned in concentration camps and for no reason except for their ethnicity. So there are examples of reparations and the precedent for it. Now, there is a process that you undergo. Reparations has international standards, and they're very simple. First of all, the offending party must apologize. You must acknowledge, number one, I committed a crime. I acknowledge that I have done something that I should not have done. Secondly, I need to apologize. Now, a lot of people, a lot of entities, corporates, nations, they just want to stop with the apology, but that's not sufficient. You must not only apologize, you must be in a process of cessation and guarantee of non-repetition, that the behavior will not happen again. That we have to deal with restitution, compensation, satisfaction, and rehabilitation. In other words, there must be full repair of the community, the people. And once that's done, there is a possibility of reconciliation. Now, what a lot of people want to do is do the reconciliation before they do the reparations. It just does not work that way. So this is established in international law. Now, quickly want to move to the history of reparations for African Americans. Why are African Americans due reparations? Well, first of all, we cited the example of the Holocaust in Nazi Germany. We can argue, I think, with no hesitation that the incursion of Europe into Africa and the ripping out of people of African descent, of Africans from continent, was the greatest Holocaust in human history over centuries. Millions upon millions of Africans were taken away from their homeland and enforced, trafficked to these United States of America and various other places throughout Central and South America. Millions. And as a result of that, we're looking at the extraction, not only the physical damages, but the extraction of wealth. The extraction of wealth. And people really need to understand that. In fact, I could come back and give you a whole lecture alone about the implications of the American Revolution actually in many respects being fought over enslavement. I won't do that today. That'll be a teaser. Perhaps I'll be invited back. But there are 2 or 3 books that you need to look at in this regard. One book is by Walter Rodney. It is called How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. Why is that important? Because Walter Rodney talks about the fact that while Africa was being underdeveloped, the resources, both human and material, were being used to develop Europe. And he uses examples, institutions that we know about, Barclays Bank, Lloyd's of London. These institutions, their origin is directly traceable to the slave trade, directly attributable to the slave trade. Now, quickly, I have to say this because one of the most important points is you had whole towns develop, Liverpool, Nantes, whole towns developed, which means that even people who were not directly involved in the slave traffic benefited from it. And that's something we need to understand in terms of the United States. Individuals did not necessarily have to be involved in the slave traffic to be the beneficiaries of it. So when you saw all of this growth and development, it meant jobs, it meant economic development. And even though there were some at the top who benefited more, it trickled down to impact almost everyone. Dr. Manning Marable, one of our most brilliant scholars, did a book entitled How Capitalism Underdeveloped Black America. And so you can see the same thing that happened in terms of the enslavement of Africans in this country, the extraction of wealth that without question, the commercial and industrial revolution in the United States would not have developed so rapidly had it not been for centuries of free labor. Give me a corporation in which I can work people free and I'll make tremendous profits. And so many of the institutions, not just in the South, by the way, what we're looking at in terms of the recent attack of white nationalists and white supremacists on the Capitol in the United States of America, that Capitol was built by what? Free African labor. The Washington Monument, many of the monuments there were built by enslaved African labor. Wall Street, and so it's not just down south, it's up south. Wall Street, built by enslaved labor. And so it's important to understand that as a part of the overall equation. And so we come to efforts to end enslavement. And of course, that's what Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation that freed some of the slaves, not all of them, hence Juneteenth. That's a whole nother discussion. Abraham Lincoln did not free all the slaves. He freed some of the slaves, and he had a political and economic motive for doing that. And that's worth studying in and of itself. Doesn't mean that it was not a good thing. It just means that we need to accurately understand what it is that Abraham Lincoln was attempting to do. And by the way, he was doing it in part because Black people were already marching by the thousands. We were deserting these plantations. We were engaged in sabotage. We were engaged in insurrection, all kinds of things. And so maybe this is a good fighting force. Maybe these people can become soldiers in this very unpopular war. Be that as it may, we were emancipated. The problem is, having built this country of allowed free labor, having in fact suffered brutal oppression for decades and generations, the question is, how will we fit in American society? Well, General Sherman had an idea about that. General Sherman said, I think it would be good if we provided every enslaved African, every freed slave with 40 acres and a mule. This is where that concept comes from. And what he wanted to do is from plots of land, of land from South Carolina all the way to Florida would have been provided 40 acres and a mule for enslaved Africans. Now think about that. What that would have meant was you would have had a stake, an endowment, in the Black community, you said you had a toehold. You know what I mean? You had something to work with in terms of beginning to build out a family. Actually, that concept was actually taken to the Reconstruction legislature. I don't have time to go through all that, but a radical Reconstruction legislature, where, by the way, in that period, we had more Black elected officials than at any other time in the present. You need to study that and understand how that came about. Black folks, more governors, more senators, more congresspeople than at sheriffs, than at any other time than the present. Something happened to change that, and that's why we understand what history is all about. And by the way, those legislatures passed legislation that is heralded to this day as some of the most socially promising and progressive legislation ever passed. But in the Congress of the United States, Andrew Johnson, who succeeded Lincoln after he was assassinated, vetoed the bill. The point is, it was not considered a crazy idea. It was seen as a good idea, but Andrew Johnson vetoed the idea, and therefore the idea of 40 acres and a mule was killed with it. What that meant was that African people did not have a stake. And so now many of us, there were 4 million Africans in the United States after emancipation, 3.5 million in the South. Those 3.5 million had to then turn to almost what's called slavery by another name. There's a gentleman named Blackman who has a book out called Slavery by Another Name. Many of us became sharecroppers, tenant farmers, agricultural laborers with no endowment. No endowment, some programs, but no real serious endowment. And the point we need to understand is that therefore reparations is not only for enslavement, it is for all of the derivative, racially exclusionary policies and practices after that. A Good Sort. There's a book by Dr. Claude Anderson called Black Labor, White Wealth. Black Labor, White Wealth. What does Dr. Claude Anderson talk about in there? Well, we go and we study history and we hear about the Homestead Act. Oh, it's a great act, you know, the railroads and people could get land and so forth. Great idea. Problem is, Black people were excluded from getting that land. You go fast forward, we fought in every war, and in every war, Black people have fought. We are America's most patient patriots. But in the Second World War, GI Bill to benefit white soldiers, we were deprived benefits from the GI Bill. One of the great pieces of legislation that passed was the Federal Housing Authority, that helped to build the suburbs. The suburbs for whom? Not Black people, but white folks. We were excluded from that, right? And in the South, you know, when Black people were struggling and miraculously actually managed to make something out of nothing, we sort of specialize in making lemonade out of lemons. I mean, so we were struggling and getting things done and holding on to the land. But the agricultural extension agents had programs that were supposed to benefit farmers, but we were excluded from that. In fact, that is one of the cases that actually got litigated, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture within the last decade actually did pay some pittance, but they did pay some reparations for that because we were excluded from that, right? And then you come down to redlining. There was once a thriving central district in Seattle, Washington, a thriving community of Black people, which Black people were proud of. Because, you know, we are a proud people and we can accomplish and we have accomplished. But guess what? Very often against our will, with forces unbeknownst to us, have decimated our communities. So redlining decimated the central district in Seattle, Washington, which was a thriving African-American community. Gentrification, which is ongoing. And then the war on drugs. More recently, the war on drugs. And of course, you all know, and you should know, the book by Michelle Alexander, brilliant book called The New Jim Crow, says and clearly makes it clear that we were, this is about the war on drugs, as the brothers and sisters used to say in the hood, is the war on us, which he demonstrated. It was targeted exclusively at Black people. So white people who smoke crack and so forth over here, or powder, or marijuana, that ain't happening over there. But over here, we are being targeted. We are becoming the fodder for the criminal, for mass incarceration. So I'm talking about these racially exclusionary policies. And then going back to the destruction of communities, the massacres that took place, in 1919, Elaine, Arkansas, a massacre that killed over some 300 people. In fact, the bloody red summer of 1919. There's a poem by, I think it's Conte Coolin, or it may not be the right one, but anyway, it talks about the fact that we are fighting, we fought, and so forth. He said, but if we must die, Claude McKay, let us die by fighting back. Soldiers in their uniforms, fighting for democracy. And most recently, you saw the coach for then the Clippers, Doc Rivers, after one of the, it may have been George Floyd. And he said, look, we keep loving America, but America just won't love us back. Gunned down in the streets in our uniforms in 1919. 1921, we're coming up on the 100th anniversary of the destruction of Black Wall Street. Many of you know about Wall Street, the Greenwood district there. Thriving district, thriving, pride, businesses, institutions, airplanes, the whole nine, destroyed by a mob, by what Dr. Julianne Malveaux calls white economic envy. Them Black folks should not have this. And we're going to see to it that they don't. So destroyed. Ida B. Wells, launched a great campaign about lynching. Thousands of Black people, thousands were lynched. And it took a courageous Black woman, Ida B. Wells, who staked her career going all over this country and the world, trying to stop lynching and to get this country to at least pass a bill again, which only now, even most recently, is about to take place. So that's the predicate for understanding why we are due reparations. What's the current state of reparations? Well, there's always been a reparations movement in this country. Always. I wish I had that citation. And by the way, one of the most ironic things is that even though we didn't get 40 acres and a mule, the slave masters were compensated for the loss of their property. This not only happened in the United States, it happened all over the British Empire. The slave masters were compensated. And I wish I had that citation, but I don't have it in front of me. But I just want to cite one example early on. And that's the example of the National Ex-Slave Mutual Relief and Bounty and Pension Association, led by a Black woman. See, Black women have always been in the forefront of leading stuff. They just led to the election of two powerful people from the state of Georgia. A whole lot of people was involved in it, but Black women were in the lead. That was Callie House. Remember that name, Callie House. Thousands of people signed up for her association. It ultimately did not succeed for lots of different reasons, but Black people have always been organizing around reparations. I got my introduction to reparations by my mentor, Queen Mother Audley Moore. Queen Mother Audley Moore. Oh, what a wonderful woman she was. I knew nothing about reparations, which is a part of the damage. How is it that I was actually a college student on my way to get a master's degree and had no knowledge about reparations? She said, Ron, I'm a brain surgeon. I operate on constipated minds. And I thank God she operated on mine and liberated it. So I now have a better sense. But Queen Mother Moore is one of those persons who worked and fought for it. The organization in Cobra, the National Coalition for Reparations for Blacks in America, was the leading organization for many, many, many years fighting for the issue of reparations. And I could go on and on and on. Randall Robinson, the book, The Debt, incredible book that you would want to read because of his contribution as well. In the most recent period, however, there was a development in the Caribbean region. the 15 nations of the Caribbean region, all of whom, by the way, are still dependent upon the former colonial powers. Because the phenomenon is that even though people achieved independence, very often the colonial powers maintain control over what? The economy. And so they're still dependent. But because of the pain and COVID, what we have seen by COVID is the same. It's COVID everywhere. The health disparities in the Caribbean, diabetes, hypertension, afflicting Black people everywhere because of the lack of access to quality health care. And, and the inability to have the resources to build out these systems of social welfare and health for people. And so they got sick of it. They said, to hell with it. We are going to demand reparations for the former and colonial powers for Native genocide, which was wonderful, because we have never, ever been a selfish people just fighting for ourselves. They recognized that in the Caribbean, the Caribs, the Alawaks, the series of Native nations were wiped out, millions wiped out. Some because of disease, but also because of the ruthless and brutality of enslavement. So they said, we want reparations for Native genocide. Even though there are a few of them left, we want repair for them, and also for African enslavement. Well, we said, gee, if they have that kind of courage and that kind of courage, that gave a jolt to the reparations movement here in the United States of America at a time when it might have been at somewhat of a low ebb. And so we had other forces that came upon the scene. Many of you became aware of reparations through a brilliant young man named Ta-Nehisi Coates. He did an article in The Atlantic. Now, I didn't really know who he was, really, but as it turns out, we knew his father, Paul Coates. And we understand that they say that the fruit don't fall far from the tree. Paul Coates has Black classic press. So he was nurtured in a family where these ideas were gestating. They were around in his environment. However, he was not a believer in reparations. He did research. His article is called The Case for Reparations. And what he did, he went to Chicago, and that idea I talked to you about redlining, he said, whoa, look at what has happened in these communities. It is the theft and extraction of wealth. So one of the great consequences of what we see is, despite the fact that we got all these mayors and artists and athletes, and it looks like we're doing really well, and we're doing better. All folks say we're showing what we want to be, showing what we're going to be, we're showing what we were. We have made some progress. But when you look at the wealth gap, most Black people are 1 or 2 paychecks away from bankruptcy. And in terms of wealth, which is your net assets, it has not significantly changed the gap between Blacks and whites in over a century. It has not budged. And so that's one of the consequences, really, of these various enslavement and all of the derivative racially exclusionary policy. Black Lives Matter burst upon the scene, and they were saying, we want our reparations. We want to talk about all of the different forms in which our communities have been afflicted and talk about how do we repair that. The movement for Black Lives, which is a broader umbrella, also involved in that process. And one of the vehicles by which that the discussion has moved is a bill in the Congress of the United States called H.R. 40. H.R. 40 was first introduced by Congressman John Conyers in 1989 as a bill to study whether or not enslavement and all of the attendant harms and injuries warranted reparations. It was an idea, and actually it was patterned after a bill that was developed by Japanese Americans. We sort of paralleled that. In fact, stay tuned, because very shortly in Seattle, there is going to be a major forum with Japanese Americans and the National African American Reparations Commission on this very question. So I'll be getting that information to Dr. Arunga. But the point is, this was a way of educating people. It asked the basic question: can't we at least study the issue of reparations? Because white folks were not on board with this. I mean, what is this? I had nothing to do with it. I mean, all these rejectionist notions, even in the Black community. It's not that we didn't want reparations, but it's in the past. The pain of the past. And by the way, it's a pie in the sky. What are we going to do right now? I noticed when I was coming into we were entered into what? The Sankofa waiting room. Well, see, what Sankofa is about is said, if you want to progress in the future, you must what? You must first go back. You have to face, from a therapeutic point of view, you have to face the pain, understand it, and then rise above it. And so, but we were using this as an educational tool, and even educating Black people and getting them on board and getting endorsements. It was a good organizing tool that took place. But after the CARICOM reparations came forward, we, in fact, the National African American Reparations Commission, went to Congressman John Conyers, who was the architect of this bill, and said, Congressman Conyers, we have studied this enough. We need a bill now that will actually talk about remedy, not just study. And Congressman Conyers being the great architect of social progressive legislation, including the Martin Luther King bill. It was he who, in fact, was the author of that legislation that gives us the third Monday in January as a national holiday, said he agreed. And so the current bill in the Congress of the United States no longer reads a study bill. It is a study bill, but it reads carefully a bill to study, and the operative term, as I tell my students, you always have to look for that operative term, and develop reparations proposals. That is a qualitative difference than just studying whether reparations should be warranted. That is the current bill that's within the Congress of the United States, headed by Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, the dynamic Congresswoman who has inherited this from Congressman John Conyers. That bill is doing quite well, and I'm going to come back and talk to you about that in just a moment. I also want to talk a minute about the National African American Reparations Commission, because we are in the thick of this struggle. It was the National African American Reparations Commission and NCOBRA that, in fact, went to Congressman Conyers to rewrite this bill, but we are just deeply engaged all over the place in trying to get people to understand what reparations is and how it should be done. I'm going to do a quick screen share. I hope I can do this screen share. I hope. Here we go, I think. Okay, quickly. So this is the National African American Reparations Commission. And what we have developed is this 10-point program here. And that 10-point program is designed to be a framework for the analysis of and for how reparations should look from the perspective of, on the right-hand side, you see all of these people on our commission, all of these outstanding faith leaders, scholars, activists. These are some of the most outstanding people in the country who are working with us on this commission. And quickly, number one, a formal apology and establishment of a MIAFA African Holocaust Institute. That is to say, that's about knowledge. The right of any person of African descent who wants to go back to Africa to be able to do that, and to do that with reparations. The right to land for social and economic development, funds for cooperative enterprises and socially responsible entrepreneurial development, funds for health, wellness, healing, the healing of Black families and communities, education for community development and empowerment, affordable housing for healthy Black communities and wealth generation, strengthening Black America's information and communications infrastructure, preserving Black sacred sites and monuments. I'm going to talk about that in a quick second. And then finally, repairing the damages of the criminal injustice system. These are some of this is the 10-point program that we have developed with the National African American Reparations Commission. And so what we do is we see ourselves, and this is what we were trying to do in Seattle actually, as an authoritative body to help shape reparations. So in the Congress of the United States, we are working on helping to get HR 40 passed, but we also do local reparations. So if you Google Evanston, Illinois and reparations, you will see that a beautiful, brilliant Black woman, again, Lord have mercy, this sister's just be getting it throwing down, Robin Rue Simmons. Robin Rue Simmons was able to get the Evanston, Illinois Council to pass a resolution to implement a program for reparations over the next 10 years with $10 million using the funds from the recreational marijuana funds, which was great because we're the ones who got abused by it. Therefore, it was like poetic justice that the money should come from all that exploitation. We are the ones who certified Evanston as being in compliance with what reparations is all about. Why do I say that? There's so much going on now with reparations that people want to make everything reparations. Ordinary public policy, that which you should be doing anyway, is not reparations. Equity is great. We really want all kind of equity policies. That is from now, henceforth, and forevermore. That is for the future. It does not deal with that which has already happened. And we have people talking about reconciliation. A lot of reconciliation stuff is in there. That's good. But reparations comes before reconciliation. And we are here to be kind of an authoritative body to help guide those conversations. We're here to talk about not just individual benefits, because sometimes people reduce it to a check. It's bigger than a check. Checks may be a part of it, but it's really about those community benefits that will uplift the entirety of our community. I talked about sacred sites. Right now, we're doing a project in Elaine, Arkansas. I mentioned that earlier. Sacred site, where we're working with people there in that town to try to deal with reckoning with what happened and making the city and the state reckon with it, putting proper memorials there, and then creating the kind of educational programs that will be beneficial. The same thing has to happen in Tulsa, Oklahoma. This is one of the greatest atrocities committed against our people. And so that's what the sacred site piece is all about. There are corporations that have been involved, colleges and institutions. All of them have to reckon with the reality of what has transpired. Finally, California has passed an HR 40, another sister, Dr. Shirley Weber, sister I've known and had the privilege of speaking for her at San Diego State University when she was professor there. She was head of the Legislative Black Caucus. She's now Secretary of State. She led the way to get a bipartisan bill introduced in the California legislature, which passed with bipartisan support. California is on the roll. So my conclusion is what? HR 40 is on the verge of being passed, and I conclude where I started. Reparations is an idea whose time has come. And the only question is whether or not you're going to get on board the train and help drive it to its logical conclusion. And the logical conclusion is reparations is more than just checks and more than just money. It is really about America reckoning with one of its original sins and dealing straight up with white supremacy and structural and institutional racism. There can be no more perfect union, without reparations. Reparations is an idea whose time has come.
Indeed. Thank you, Dr. Daniels. Indeed. I think we have time for questions very briefly. Ashley?
Hello. Yes, we do have time for questions. You are welcome to send your questions directly to me, Ashley Jones. I can filter through them, but we have some pre-questions ready. With the arguments of reparations, what are some kind of ways of students, how can we get involved now? How can we start the conversation, especially here in Washington? How can we get things started?
Well, I think one of the ways to do it, you're already doing that. I think that you need to study first to begin to look, this is a good way of beginning. I'm sure it's already begun, knowing what reparations is, and then beginning to see how does it apply in the greater Washington area. In what ways? Are there corporations that may have been involved in being complicit in gentrification or involved in redlining? Then they should be examined. Are there universities, maybe not in your area, but in many instances, universities have played a role, have profited and have benefited from, not because they had enslaved persons, but they may have been involved in ways that, for example, the university in Washington, D.C., I'm blanking on now because I'm speaking so rapidly, the law school there. It'll come to me in a minute. But anyway, they did not have enslaved Africans, but when at an hour of crisis, they were willing to benefit from enslavement as a way of saving their institution, Georgetown. And so Georgetown, the students are really working with them to say, you need to reckon with this. Atlanta, Georgia, for example, there's something we're now looking at called the Chattahoochee Brick Company. I glossed over something called convict lease labor. You can Google it, convict lease labor. After the Civil War, and because you're talking about the criminalization of people, this is not new. People they didn't have any work, they didn't know what to do. So it became against the law to hang out, against the law to be loitering, against the law and so you'd be locked up. And then what they would do is lease you out to a corporation, and then you would be in a new form of slavery. Chattahoochee Brick Company was one of those. And so we now are working with some students in Atlanta, Georgia, who are working on doing the research, telling the narrative, and also beginning to organize the community to begin to deal with that. There's no question that the city of Seattle was complicit in the issue of gentrification and redlining. And I think this is one of the reasons that Mayor Jenny Durkin was thinking in terms of some kind of program along those lines. Well, there's no reason why you can't continue to talk to people in the community, have dialogue about it, and maybe the city council will decide to do something, or maybe there's a demand that comes up from the community saying, we want reparatory justice for the decimation, not only the central district, I understand there are other areas where Black people live that have virtually disappeared. And there are people who are working on that issue that you can connect with.
Thank you for that answer. I have another one. Are there any provisions in the reparations plan for helping African Americans attend college, perhaps free or reduced tuition programs?
Well, that's one of the things that could potentially come out of the commission. The notion that there would be certainly debt relief, no question about that, aid for HBCUs certainly, but there could well be a program where there was some kind of tax credit or something that in fact makes it possible for students to have reduced tuition, or in some instances, based on certain criteria, to actually have free tuition. Yes, that is a possibility.
Thank you. Another question. This comes from Carl Forbes. He says, I appreciate how you framed your talk in highlighting corporations that directly benefited from African enslavement. In the US discussion, how do we get US corporations and organizations, that benefited from slavery to participate in reconciliation with Black people in this country?
Well, we have to take a lesson from one of our ancestors. This one is a brother, a bad brother. His name was Frederick Douglass. And Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has and it never will. So a moral appeal is not likely to get it. It will have to be people organizing and demanding that this happen. And it's interesting, if you see what happened around the inflection point around George Floyd, I mean, because even in some corporations are responding, but you know why they responded? Because the employees inside the company said, look, no. We're ready to go on strike. We're willing to risk something to say that you have to address these issues. Look at athletes and artists. I mean, a lot of people are getting engaged saying it is time for reparatory justice. And so that's an organizing piece that you need to work on, and we can help you with that. But these corporations don't like to have their brands damaged. They don't want their reputations damaged. And so if we find the record, if you start, and by the way, we spend resources. We are, in fact, we tend to pay for what we want and beg for what we need, unfortunately. We have over $2 trillion in economic income. It's like Martin Luther King said the night before he was assassinated, he was urging us. Go back and look at that speech. That's the other thing too. Don't just look at the surface of leaders and so on. Dig deeply. Martin Luther King was a revolutionary in the sense that he was moving towards creating an entirely different society. But if you go to that monument, you don't see any of that. You don't hear him saying true compassion is more than flinging a coin at a beggar. It comes to understand that the edifice, translation system, that produces beggars needs restructuring. He was moving to say this society has got to be radically changed. And so he also, on that, the night before he was assassinated, he said, look, if you got Coca-Cola, Seal Test Milk, you know, if these companies are not supporting us, we should not support them. That's what the Montgomery bus boycott was about, withdrawing our support. So we spend lots of money, and we ought to demand that if there are corporations, first of all, they ought to have good policies, inclusion policies, equity policies anyway. But beyond that, if they are offending corporations, and almost you can't hardly find one that's not, they need to pay up, right? But the way to do that is by first confronting them constructively and positively and escalating the pressure until they are willing to say, let's negotiate. And by the way, cardinal principle, they cannot make the decision about what the remedy will be. We have to decide that. The injured party, hear me clearly now, because here's what happens very often. They want, oh, here, we'll give you this, we'll give you that. No. We have to decide. The injured party, the party that inflicts the harm cannot define the remedy. That's like a colonial mentality. That's a patriarchal mentality. We have to decide and agree to the remedy.
All right, how about one more question? Sure, okay. Does our country need both local reparations movements and federal reparation movements, or is there a conflict between both happening?
We need both, but the big picture is going to be the federal. I mean, you know, the big picture in terms of the trillions of dollars that are going to be required in allocation of resources can only come from the federal government. But that does not mean that we should not have robust work done at local levels. All across this country, people should be investigating who was complicit with the enslavement of our people, who was complicit with redlining and gentrification, who was complicit with the war on drugs. And that's almost every community was in some way involved. And they need to therefore repair that damage. So when you talk about, for example, the efforts to decriminalize all drugs or the effort to legalize marijuana, that's why reparations advocates are all saying, look, you just can't say it's legal. No. You must reinvest in the communities that were heavily damaged by this. You must expunge records. You must make it possible for those who were, you know, brothers and sisters who are out there in the hood with some innovative entrepreneurs. They ought to have the opportunity to have a license to get involved in it and have the resources to make that happen. You see what I'm saying? So there is plenty of work. We are at the point of helping finally to move this nation to the point that it has never been. Langston Hughes said, America has never been America to me. We're at a point, and you know, and it doesn't really matter. You've seen it. It doesn't matter whether you're Oprah Winfrey or you're, you know, a mayor or whatever. If you walk down the street, you may be subject to be killed. And in this crazy period that's going on now, you may even be targeted to be killed. So your status as a wealthy or well-off Black person does not immunize you from racism and white supremacy. And what's happening is, what I love is now that some of our brothers and sisters who have a little bit more, they're now understanding, because I have a little bit more, you know, I am obligated to go back and invest with my community and help build my community. You know, Colin Kaepernick just launched the program just yesterday, I understand. And that's why, by the way, we also have to support people like Colin Kaepernick, because in the past, I have to say shamefully, when Don Carlos and Tommy Smith in whatever that year was in the Olympics, they did this, and we said, yeah. But then we left them out to dry. We left them, our community left them out to dry, and they suffered. So we cannot allow our people to be courageous and advocate for us. We have to take care of our people. When people go out on there and they sacrifice for us, we have to have their back. Because otherwise, it's really, I mean, people are going to do what they're going to do. I mean, Paul Robeson is a class. If you don't know Paul Robeson, study Paul Robeson, one of the most gifted Goodness, man, this man was an art athlete. He was a poet. I mean, this man had so many gifts. He was a genius. That's what genius is, multi-talented, right? Emotep in the present, so to speak. But he sacrificed, and he really suffered more than he should have suffered, because we really did not take him in and embrace him. But he did it anyway. That's what people are willing to do. But we should not allow our people to just suffer. We ought to wrap our arms around them, and make sure that they know that they've got a place, that they've got a home.
Wonderful. Well, Dr. Ron, we have 2 give backs for you. One from Karen Vargas. Karen, would you like to unmute?
I would like to say to Dr. Ron Daniels that to give us an understanding of the depth of reparations, and not just reparations, but the process and what's needed. Because I think when some of us hear reparations, we don't understand the depth of the process. So I just wanted to thank you for the labor of love all these years to be able to advocate in a way that's transformative. We could talk about it all day, and we could go back and forth, but when it comes down to it, we got to put meat on the bone to what that is, and ensure that we are moving it to a place that one is health, reconciliation. We're looking at all the systems, but the accountability, and not letting them worm off the hook, but to be able to, have that language to say, oh no, but you will, because your laws say, and your definitions say, and all, as we go down the say list, to be able to say, no, you will be accountable. There's no getting away. You will acknowledge, and you will begin to move and repair that which you have broken. And so I just wanted to thank you, because my heart is full with everything. And we talking about it, but we gonna move it over here in the Northwest. We gonna be right here, standing right alongside of you, and you say, help us navigate this, because the work definitely must be done in this Pacific Northwest region, especially in Seattle, Pierce County, and Kidnap County too. And so we gonna stay the course. And thank you, Dr. Daniels. I said, just I'm so grateful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And the next one is from Aaron Thomas. Aaron, are you available to unmute?
I just want to say, this is my second engagement with you. You came, engaged with us again via Zoom. I believe by invitation from, oh goodness, I can't remember, but somebody said, you got to talk to Mary Flowers. And so how
Yes,
that works,
yes.
invited all of us to be a part of the conversation. So I just have to say thank you again for making yourself available, for sharing this level of information. You did a stellar job in sharing all this information in such a concise and quick way. You did a stellar job at that. And my fingers were moving a mile a minute because I'm capturing so many notes. I want to thank you for acknowledging so many people who's been a part of this movement all across this country. And I have a lot of homework to do. So I just want to appreciate you and thank you for just being a steward of this information and making sure that we all do our part, and seeing that we do repair ourselves and we repair our communities. Thank you so much.
Well, I want to thank you all, and I apologize. I was trying to leave a little bit more space for questions and answers, so I didn't quite achieve my objectives. I was trying to feast, but it is a lot of information to try to squeeze in a tight spot. But I wish I could have been a little bit more concise, but hopefully we got a good start.
Oh, Dr. Daniels, you did an amazing job. We are so honored that you came, and the way you prepared us to look at reparations. What an honor to have had you here. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I also want to take this moment to thank the IESS, Teresa Liba. Thank you so much for financing the Black History Month this month. You have been so helpful and so supportive. I want to thank Tara Hardy, Ashley Jones. I want to thank Trey Applegate, our crew, for setting up this wonderful program. So with all of you from Olympia to Tacoma and friends in between, big shout out to Radio Tacoma for putting us on blast for free. Well done, Tacoma Weekly. We love all of you. We want you to continue to support us because we got work to do. With reparations in the fold, we have work to do. Thank you so much. And don't forget to come back next Friday for our lunch and learn, 12 noon. Thank you very much.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. Peace.